The kitchen was a blur of caterers and my mother's expensive perfume. I'd come straight from my analyst desk, my best blazer wrinkled from the train. She stood in front of the swinging door that led to the living room, where the party hummed with investor laughter. Her hand pressed flat against the wood. "You're not coming in," she said, her voice a low, social-calibrated murmur. My brother, the guest of honor, glanced over from the champagne table. He looked away. She peeled a 20 from her clutch, tucked it into my blazer pocket like I was the help. "Use the service entrance." The caterers pretended not to hear. The $20 bill felt like a brand through the fabric of my pocket. I didn't move. I just stood there, taking in the scene she'd constructed. My mother, in a tailored dress, was the gatekeeper of my brother's new world. His tech startup had secured its first major round of funding. The party was a showcase, every guest a potential connection or a walking testimonial to his success. I was a smudge on the presentation. My job as a low-level quantitative analyst at a mid-tier firm didn't translate. It wasn't a story she could tell. It was just a job, a grind, with a commute and a 401k. To her, it was evidence of a lack of ambition, a failure to launch with the required spectacle. She didn't shout. Her cruelty was administrative. "Look at you," she said, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive inventory, my sensible shoes, my outdated bag, the tiredness I couldn't mask. "You smell like failure. Like photocopiers and public transit." She leaned in slightly, a confidential gesture for the caterer's benefit. "These people in there, they're founders, VPs, millionaires. I can't have a low-level analyst lowering the family's value. It sends the wrong message about our stock." Our stock. She said it so naturally, as if we were a publicly traded company and she was the CEO protecting the share price. My brother was the flagship product. I was a liability to be managed. I finally looked past her, through the small window in the door. My brother was laughing, clapping a man on the back. He caught my eye for a second. His smile didn't falter, but his gaze shifted quickly to my mother, then back to his guest. It was a micro-expression of collusion. He had approved this. Or, more likely, he had expressed a worry, will she fit in? And my mother had executed the solution. He chose silence, allowing her to be the villain, while he reaped the peace and the pristine narrative of his party. He got to be the golden child, unburdened. She got to feel powerful, the protector of the dynasty. I was the necessary sacrifice for the evening's ecosystem. I thought about arguing. I could list my credentials, my steady climb, my reliability. But I saw the set of her jaw. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a policy enactment. The $20 was the final, calculated insult. It reduced my attempt to attend my own brother's celebration to a service rendered, showing up, being turned away, disappearing without a scene. A tip for good behavior. For compliance. The hum of the party was a wall of sound I was not permitted to pass through. The caterers moved around me, arms laden with canapés, their faces carefully blank. I was furniture in my own family's home. I looked at the bill in my pocket, then back at her expectant face. She was waiting for my reaction, tears, outrage, a plea, so she could cite it as further proof of my emotional unreadiness for their world. That night was not an exception. It was a rule, finally spoken aloud. The pattern was my life's background noise. I just hadn't wanted to give it a name. When my brother, David, was accepted into an elite private high school, my parents leased a luxury car to fit in with the other families during drop-off. When I made the honor roll at my public school, my mother said, "Good, that will help with scholarships." My achievements were about cost saving. His were about image building. Our childhood Christmases were the clearest ledger. David's gifts were experiences, skiing trips, a new laptop, a summer robotics camp. Mine were practical, a new winter coat, a sturdy backpack, a check to deposit into my college fund. "You're so sensible," they'd say, as if my lack of desire for extravagance was a trait they'd cultivated, not a necessity they'd imposed. The financial logic was always flawless and cold. David's potential was a high-yield asset. My stability was a modest, safe bond. They invested where they expected the highest return. When David wanted to start his first, failed app in college, they funded his living expenses so he could work for free. The same year, I took a work-study job in the library. It builds character, my father said. David's failures were noble experiments. My need for a student loan was a lesson in fiscal responsibility. I learned to stop asking. I learned that my needs, when presented, became a discussion of household budgeting. His wants were presented as strategic investments in the family future. My mother was the chief financial officer of this operation. Her love was a conditional grant. Her approval was a stock price that only David's news could elevate. I remember being 15, trying on a dress for a school dance. It was simple, on sale. She looked me up and down and said, "It's fine. It doesn't make you look any bigger." She then spent an hour helping David pick out a suit for a debate tournament, talking about the impression of success. I stopped sharing my life with her. My dates, my friends, my promotions, they were met with a muted, "That's nice, dear," before she pivoted to David's latest venture. I was the audience for the main event. My role was to witness his rise, to provide a contrast that made his light brighter. The night of the party, she wasn't banning me from a room. She was protecting the narrative she'd spent a lifetime curating. I was a fact that contradicted the story she was selling to those millionaires, that our family was a flawless incubator of excellence. A low-level analyst with commute wrinkles didn't fit the brochure. The boundary was a 10 by 15 storage unit on the outskirts of the city. It held everything from my childhood that wasn't already in my cramped apartment: yearbooks, my old desk, boxes of books, the porcelain doll my grandmother gave me. My parents had been paying for it since I moved out, a grudging concession. A month after the party, my mother called. Her voice was all business. "We're downsizing. The storage unit is a frivolous expense. You have 30 days to clear it out or they'll auction the contents." I was silent. She mistook it for protest. "It's time you stood on your own 2 feet completely," she said. "Consider this the final push." I visited the unit that weekend. Standing in the dusty, fluorescent-lit aisle, I understood. This wasn't about downsizing. It was a final severance. The unit was the last tangible tether, the last thread of obligation they could cut. By forcing me to absorb this cost, this logistical burden, they were washing their hands of the last remnant of my childhood. It was an administrative eviction from the family archive. I opened a box. On top was a framed photo of the 4 of us at some long-ago beach. We were all smiling. I looked at my own face, trusting and open. I felt nothing for that girl. She was a stranger. I called a few moving companies. The cost to haul it all to my apartment, which had no space, was astronomical. I would have to rent a truck myself, bribe friends with pizza, spend a whole weekend moving things I didn't even want. That was the calculation. They knew the effort and cost would fall on me. They knew it would be a strain. This was the point. To make the process of holding onto my own past so burdensome that I'd choose to abandon it. To make me complicit in my own erasure. That was the moment I stopped. I didn't stop loving them, that had already changed into something quieter and more distant. I stopped asking them, in any way, to see me. I stopped hoping for a different version of my mother. The internal begging ceased. The $20 bill from the party was still in the zippered compartment of my work bag. I took it out. I used it, along with $48 of my own, to pay for a professional shredding service and a junk hauling company. Over 2 days, I went through every box. I saved a single folder of documents and 3 books. Everything else, the photos, the dolls, the trophies, the childhood art, was systematically destroyed or discarded. I didn't feel cathartic. I felt efficient. I was closing a subsidiary. When the unit was empty, I turned in the key. The door clanged shut with a final, metallic sound. I was now, in every practical sense, an orphan. I did not send a message saying the unit was cleared. I did not call for a final dramatic confrontation. I simply changed my phone number and redirected all essential mail. My silence was absolute. I worked, I saved, I advanced. A year after the storage unit, I received a promotion to senior quantitative analyst. The raise was significant. I used part of it as a down payment on a small, clean condo. It was entirely mine. The silence there was not lonely, it was peaceful. I framed no family photos. The walls held art I liked, maps of places I wanted to see. The consequences were not of my making. I heard through a former colleague that my brother's startup, after a flashy second round, began to struggle. The millionaires at the party turned out to be fair-weather investors. Without a constant stream of triumphant news, my mother's social currency dwindled. She could no longer trade on his reflected glory. My father, I learned, had quietly begun meeting with a financial advisor. The strain of supporting David's lifestyle and my mother's presentations was showing. They were not in trouble, but the facade required more effort to maintain. The legal and financial severance was complete. I was untraceable to them. The true consequence was the void my absence created in their narrative. There was no longer a low-level analyst to contrast against, to pity, to use as a motivational scare story for David. Without the shadow, their light seemed less bright. My mother, in a rare, unguarded moment, commented to a family friend, "It's so strange, she just vanished. After everything we did for her." The friend later told me the comment was met with puzzled silence. It was the first time many had realized I was gone. Last week, I found the $20 bill from the party, still in that old work bag. I didn't keep it. I went to a little French bakery near my new condo, the kind of place that smells of real butter and patience. I bought 2 perfect croissants. I ate one slowly at a small table by the window. I left the other, wrapped, on the bench outside for whoever might need it. The 20 was spent. The transaction was complete. I walked home in the quiet morning. There was no victory lap. No screaming into the void. Just a woman, walking home after a good breakfast, with a day of her own life ahead of her. The revenge was never an action. It was a state of being. I was free, and they had to live with what they'd done to get here. My silence was the sentence. My peace was the verdict. 5 years later, I saw my mother. It was an accident, in an airport terminal. She was older, her posture still perfect, but somehow more brittle. She was alone, staring at a flight board. I was returning from a conference where I'd been a keynote speaker. My carry-on was quality, my coat was tailored, I smelled of airport coffee and my own calm. I watched her for a full minute from a distance. She never saw me. I realized then that her vision had always been selective. She only saw what she needed to see to build her story. My absence had become a permanent blind spot in her world. I felt no pull to step into her sightline. I simply turned and walked to my gate. My brother's startup eventually folded. The details were in a business journal I read online. It cited over-reliance on perceived social capital and strategic misalignment. I understood the translation. The millionaires had left. The family's value, as my mother defined it, had crashed. I heard through the old, faint grapevine that my parents had to help him with significant debts. The luxury car was sold. The narrative had cracked under its own weight. I never felt glad. I felt a distant, clinical validation, like a scientist whose hypothesis had been proven correct. The real closure was in the quiet of my own life. I married a man who loves me for my quiet, for my steadiness. He's a teacher. We don't talk about stock or value. We talk about ideas and what to plant in our small garden. When our daughter was born, my mother-in-law held her with a joy that was simple and uncalculated. I felt a pang for what I never had, but it was a clean pain, like the ache of a healed bone. It no longer governed me. I kept one thing from the past. Not a photo. It's the title page of my first major published financial analysis. the one that established my reputation. At the bottom, in the small print, are my credentials. It proves I am an expert in my field. It is a fact. It cannot be argued with, or spun, or tipped. I have it filed away, not for pride, but as a document of existence. I am here. I built this. No one gave it to me, and no one can take it away. My revenge was never about them seeing it. It was about me knowing it was there. The story they tell about their family now has a hole in it where I used to be. My story is whole. And it is finally, peacefully, mine.